Hello everyone, I'm Professor Geek. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to our Boogeyman week of Monstober. We are just closing it out at this moment, and I did not want to let the week go by without posting a Boogeyman archetype video. I hesitated on whether or not even to do this one though, because I feel like we've covered it pretty thoroughly in the live streams, but not everybody catches all of the live streams, and I thought I could also put a spin on it in terms of how to write a good Boogeyman story. So that's what we'll do in this video. First though, we should go ahead and define what the Boogeyman is, what the Boogeyman archetype is. And as we've said in some of the live streams, the Boogeyman is a childhood terror. That's where it starts, and it certainly follows you into adulthood, but it is a childhood terror. That's the seed. It is an irrational fear, it's a primal fear, it's innate. It's fear of the darkness, the fear of snakes, spiders, or whatever, the fear of what could be in the closet, even though you rationally know nothing could be in the closet, but could there be? That's the idea. As we grow older, we learn not to pay so much attention to that type of fear and that type of rationale. And we go on to more adult-like fears about payments and jobs and education and whatnot. But the childhood fears remain. They don't go away, and they can often present themselves in disturbing ways throughout our life if we haven't fully processed them at some point along the way. They inhabit a space between the unlearned and the learned in terms of fears. And what I mean by that is there are certain fears that are just innate within our psyche. Like I said, most people are afraid of a creepy crawly type of creature, are afraid of a reptilian creature. That's innate almost. You don't always have to be taught that, despite what a lot of people would claim. But then there certainly are learned fears as well. A child might develop a fear of a street if their parents constantly tell them, stay away from the road, stay away from the road, stay away from the road, you'll get hit, you'll get hit, you'll get hit, that kind of thing. And the Boogeyman inhabits a space in between those. He overlaps because there's a social function of Boogeyman stories, and that is that he's a warning. Parents will tell their children, don't go near this place or the so-and-so will get you. You find stories in different cultures about boogeymen who eat up little children who stay up past their bedtime. The story of Krampus has become pretty well known now, the counterpart to St. Nicholas, who eats up the bad little children on Christmas as St. Nicholas brings the good little children toys. So there's a social function to the stories, whether it's a warning for children not to go into dangerous areas or a motivation for children to act in a certain way, and that becomes ingrained in childhood as well. So the more adult stories are the tales that we might tell of boogeymen today can veer toward one of those sides or the other, the unlearned or the learned. And when writing a boogeyman story, we need to realize what type of story we want to tell. Do we want to tell a story that's more about primal fear, or do we want to tell a story that's more about a cultural fear, a learned fear in one society? Because depending on your answer, you'll have to balance your tale and your treatment of the boogeyman in a certain way. Since the boogeyman is a highly personal monster, it's personal to each individual. What frightens you most is not going to exactly be the same thing that frightens the next person most, and your characters are no different than that. To have just one blanket boogeyman in a story or a movie or a book or whatever, a comic, and that's everybody's boogeyman, you'll have to approach that in a certain way so it doesn't come off as thin. At the same time, though, if you portray a boogeyman as personally terrifying to a certain character, you need to allow the reader to empathize with that terror as well. It has to scare the reader as well for a good boogeyman story. So how do you balance that personal touch to the character and a more universal fear for the reader? And in order to illustrate this, I have a couple examples on deck. These are two films that we've talked a lot about this week already. Stephen King's It, whether we're talking about the book or the first miniseries, they've portrayed this the most, but even the recent remake portrays this to a certain point. Pennywise appears to the different children as the thing they would most fear. So he goes after Eddie as a leper, as one who's unclean and full of germs and contagious and all of that. He goes after Richie as the teenage werewolf who Richie had just seen at the movie theater that day. He goes after Bill as the mummy at one point. Again, just films or stories or things that these children have been exposed to that terrified them individually. I think he even appeared as a photo that Stan had seen in his father's office or something like that at one point, a painting that creeped him out or something like that, if I'm remembering it correctly. So all of those things are personally terrifying to the characters within the book. The reader might not be too terrified of the mummy. I mean, the classic mummy isn't all that threatening. It can barely move. that story was more about pathos than real fear, at least to modern audiences, or contemporary audiences for Stephen King's It when he wrote it. So how do you make Pennywise frightful? Well, you give the information behind it. You let the reader know what that boogeyman really wants to do to that child or that character, so that once they trap that character by appearing as their most personal fear, then you know as the reader what's coming, the more universal terror. So that's one way you can really show the individual personalized fears of your characters through boogeymen. The other example that we've talked about a lot is Halloween. Halloween 78, John Carpenter's classic film. We just did the rewatch the other night. And in this case, you have a single monster, Michael Myers. He doesn't appear in different ways to different people. He attacks them all in the same manner, kills them all for the most part in the very same manner. So he's not individual to the different characters, and yet he is solidly a boogeyman in that movie. And how the film accomplishes this is by having him prey on a societal fear. In a sense, he's punishing the promiscuity of Laurie Strode's friends. And in this way, he, embodying the consequence of promiscuity, or the consequence of being a bad girl, is in a way her deepest fear, at least as she's portrayed to us in the film, because for most of the film she is declining temptations from her friends to go sleep with a boy, or to go out drinking, or to do this or that instead of babysitting and whatnot. She remains the good girl. A film like Halloween, rather than looking at the individual fears of the characters, plays on the social fear, which is what are the consequences of promiscuity. And that's not a fear just for prudish people today or whatever. That's always been a fear of cultures and societies from the get-go, especially before the advent of the birth control pill. Unwanted pregnancies threw a real wrench in society. They could muddy up bloodlines, they could muddy up inheritances. They were a real threat to a ordered society of family lines and property and all of that. Of course, in today's society, or even contemporary times when Halloween was made, you lay over it the religious taboos as well, and you have a real fear of the consequences, and that's something that slasher movies tap into on some level, each one of them. So hopefully that makes sense. I had to give this video a little bit of short shrift because of schedules and everything, but just to recap, if you're going to write a boogeyman story, you have to decide whether you want the boogeyman to appear as personal fears to the characters in your story, and there's a strength to that, because then you can really delve into the psychology of these characters, and you can go a lot of places that you can't if you didn't have him appear in personalized ways to each of them. But you also have to balance that with a tap into a more universal fear, and you have to give some more information than you naturally would. And as a result, the movie It, or the book It, or whatever, is a far more complex story than Halloween 78. The other option is to go the Halloween 78 version, where you don't go quite as deep, but you get a more powerful, concise punch within a more confined space. And you do that by having the boogeyman embody cultural, societal fears, and relaying that to each of the characters and their actions. That is the Boogeyman archetype video. I'm very much looking forward to Werewolf Week next week. I have a lot of cool things planned for that. Definitely come back. Thanks for liking, subscribing. Links to the Patreon are in the description. Check out my Twitter. The link to that is in the description as well. I'm going to post a poll soon for listeners to vote on which werewolf film they'd like to rewatch next week on a live stream again, so that'll be a lot of fun. And until then, keep enjoying and digging deeper into the Halloween stories you love. Thanks for watching.